Halloween had always been special in my small town. Every year, the whole place seemed to transform overnight into a carnival of horror. Pumpkins sat on every doorstep, their crooked smiles lit by flickering candlelight, and skeletons dangled from trees, swaying in the cool autumn breeze. But there was something different about this Halloween. Something darker. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another year of spooky decorations, haunted houses, and kids running from door to door begging for candy. But the rumors had started circulating weeks before the holiday. They whispered about the return of the Lantern Man. It was just a story, a piece of local folklore, or so I thought. The kind of tale parents tell their kids to scare them into behaving. The Lantern Man was supposed to be some long-dead spirit who roamed the town every Halloween night, carrying an old-fashioned lantern. He'd appear on the outskirts, in the woods or along the empty roads, his face hidden beneath a hood. The story went that if you saw his lantern flicker in the distance, you had to turn away and run, or else he'd follow you. And if he caught you, well, no one really knew what happened then. But this year the stories felt more real. People had been seeing strange things. A flickering light in the woods late at night, footsteps where there shouldn't be any, and shadows moving in the trees. Some even claimed to have seen the Lantern Man himself, standing at the edge of the forest, watching. I didn't believe in the Lantern Man. At least not until Halloween night. I was 17 that year, just a bit too old for trick-or-treating, but still young enough to enjoy the thrill of Halloween. My friends and I had planned to spend the night at Mason's house, hanging out in his garage, swapping ghost stories and watching horror movies. It was a typical Halloween for us. Around 10 p.m., after a few rounds of candy trading and some half-hearted scares, Mason suggested we head out to the woods behind his house. It was part of a larger forest that stretched for miles, a dark and creepy place, especially at night. "I bet we can find the Lantern Man," he said with a mischievous grin. We all groaned, knowing he was just trying to freak us out. But the challenge had been made, and none of us wanted to back down. After all, it was Halloween, and what's a better way to spend the night than chasing after some local legend? So, armed with nothing but a couple of flashlights and our false bravado, we set off into the woods. The night was cool and the air smelled like damp leaves and wood smoke. The further we walked, the quieter it became. No trick-or-treaters, no distant sounds of laughter or parties, just the wind rustling through the trees and the crunch of dead leaves beneath our feet. We wandered deeper into the woods, joking and laughing to keep the mood light, but something was off. There was a heaviness in the air, a kind of tension that none of us could shake. The deeper we went, the more I started to feel like we were being watched. Suddenly Emma, one of my friends, stopped dead in her tracks. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing ahead. I followed her gaze, my heart skipping a beat. Through the trees, maybe 100 yards away, there was a light, a faint, flickering glow. It could have been anything, maybe just a trick of the light or someone else out in the woods with a lantern. But the way it moved, swaying slowly, unnaturally, made my skin crawl. Mason laughed, but it sounded forced. "Okay, very funny. Someone's trying to prank us." But no one else was laughing. The light grew closer, cutting through the darkness like a beacon, and with it came a sound, slow, deliberate footsteps. Whoever or whatever was holding that lantern was walking toward us, and fast. "Let's get out of here," Emma said, her voice trembling. We all turned and started to walk back the way we came, but when I glanced over my shoulder, the light was still there, still following, and even closer now. The footsteps grew louder, crunching through the underbrush with an eerie rhythm. We broke into a run. I don't remember much of the sprint through the woods, just the pounding of my heart in my ears and the branches whipping against my face as I tried to keep up with the others. Every few seconds I'd glance back, and each time the lantern was closer, bobbing in the darkness like it was floating. We burst out of the woods and into Mason's backyard, gasping for breath. The safety of his house was only a few yards away. But as we reached the porch, Mason froze, staring at something behind us. I turned, my stomach knotting with fear. There, at the edge of the woods, the lantern swayed in the dark. And standing beneath it was a figure, tall, draped in a black hooded cloak. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't need to. The way it stood, motionless except for the slight sway of the lantern, was enough to send shivers down my spine. We bolted inside, slamming the door behind us. For a long time, none of us said a word. We just sat there, breathing hard, staring at each other, trying to process what we'd just seen. We stayed in Mason's house for the rest of the night, too terrified to go back outside. We didn't talk much after that, just sat in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. By the time morning came, it almost felt like a bad dream. The daylight made everything seem less frightening, more rational. Maybe it had just been some elaborate Halloween prank. Maybe someone had been out there messing with us. But deep down I knew better. A few days later, I was walking home from school when I noticed something odd. There, on the sidewalk in front of my house, was a single, small, carved pumpkin. Its face was twisted into a crude, eerie grin, and inside, instead of a candle, there was a tiny, flickering lantern. It wasn't something I'd put there. I bent down, feeling a chill run through me as I picked it up. The pumpkin felt cold, almost unnaturally so, and as I turned it over, I saw a small note crudely scrawled on the bottom. "See you next Halloween." I dropped the pumpkin and ran inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked the door and closed the blinds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. That night as I lay in bed I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the house sent my nerves on edge. And just as I was about to drift off, I heard it, the soft, distant sound of footsteps outside my window. I didn't dare look,